I'm going to start my video. Hopefully everybody can see me. I don't normally wear glasses, so it's a little weird looking at myself. I am going to actually stop the video in a minute just to make certain that we have the full bandwidth for the presentation. I am coming to you from sunny Tucson, Arizona, where it is probably like 105 outside right now. So I'm sitting inside of my air-conditioned house. And that's not really what's behind me. So today we're going to talk about Task Manager in Planning Cloud in 50 minutes or less. And to be honest, I did a presentation on Task Manager several months ago. And this in some ways is a little bit of a repeat. But the reason why we're doing this right now is because Task Manager is now available in planning. So you don't actually have to have access to another pod that has Task Manager installed. You can actually install it in your planning instance. So that's kind of a nice thing. So let me stop the video and I'm going to move forward through my slides. So first of all, disclaimers and notes about the training. These slides represent the work and opinions of the presenter are not necessarily an official position of Oracle. And then the last bullet here is that Oracle EPM Cloud changes potentially every month. And you know, that's actually one of the really fantastic things about EPM Cloud is that there are always new features that are becoming part of the product. I believe that Task Manager will actually be part of the install for all EPM products at some point. So it is now part of the install for financial consolidation and close. It's been there all along. But now it's also going to be, available in planning when you build a brand new application. And in addition, I believe that going down the road that it will be available as part of profitability and cost management. And you can actually use Task Manager to run data load rules from data management. So you can execute tasks that are data load tasks, data management tasks, because data management tasks are kind of standard tasks in FCC or planning. So that's kind of a nifty thing. So let me continue on. So the first and most important thing about Argano, or Argano InterRel as we used to be called, is that our mission is to leave the world a smarter place than we found it. And what that means is that we have pretty regular webinars on new features. We presented at conferences like Kscope. We also have a good bit of hands-on workshop training where you actually can get into an environment, go through workshops from actually a printed book and get your hands dirty so you can actually see what happens when you break something. And that's probably the most valuable. It's certainly how I learned anyway. So we are a five-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. And that's pretty impressive, but equally impressive is our Net Promoter Score. So the industry average for system integrators and your Net Promoter Score is a measure of how likely your clients are to recommend you to someone else. And the industry average is about 24%, but Argano InterRel's is 77%. And I can tell you before I came to Argano that I met a lot of people from Argano at Kscope, and I was really impressed. In addition to the fact that there's quite a few books out there, the whole Look Smarter Than You Are series. We don't have a Look Smarter book on Task Manager yet, but maybe at some point in the future. So everyone at Argano is very geared towards helping you be successful and understand the products on your own. So let's talk a little bit about what the universe looked like before Task Manager was part of the planning build. Because to be honest, you have been able to use Task Manager as a way of scheduling and auditing performance of tasks in planning, even before it was an option in the planning build. But it was a little cumbersome. So what you would do is you had to have like the FCC pod, where Task Manager is installed in part of the standard planning build. So it really meant that you had to use two pods. You had to use the pod where Task Manager was installed, which was normally FCC, and then you had to have the pod where you actually had your planning application. So you had to have two pods, and that might have been a little bit cumbersome. So what you would have done at that point, you would have, on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a picture of a screen in FCC. You would have gone to the connections card, and you would have created a new connection to the pod where planning was installed. So over on the left-hand side, it shows you that you would choose a connection to an EPM Cloud pod, and then over on the right-hand side, you would give that connection a name, EPM Planning, and then you would log on as someone that had the ability to create task templates and create task schedules and create tasks. So on the left-hand side, I chose an EPM pod, and on the right-hand side, I actually put in the URL for my planning instance, which would have been separate from my FCC instance, and then the login as Bob, who was a service administrator. And then once you did that, in the pod that contained Task Manager, you would run this process called Sync EPM Connections. And that would basically go over to the planning pod, and it would say, oh, it's a pod with planning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find all of the Task Manager integrations that are available for planning, and I'm going to add them to the list of task types that I see in Task Manager. So FCC has task types that include things like running a consolidation rule or entering a journal. Hey, planning has different types of tasks. So planning has tasks like clearing a cube, running a cube refresh. Planning also has similar task types like enter form data and running a business rule. So the sync process would have the Task Manager pod connect to the new pod to which you made a connection, and it would pull over all those task types from whatever pod you were connecting to, which in this case would be a planning pod. And by the way, you can do this with profitability and cost management as well. You can go into wherever you have Task Manager installed. You can make a connection to your PCM pod. Hey, that will pull over all the task types that are available in PCM, profitability and cost management, which are things like running allocation rules. And then they become tasks that you can execute from wherever Task Manager is installed, which would be your FCC pod or your planning pod. Right, so once the synchronization process was complete, in whatever pod you were in, you would go into Task Manager and you would go into the task types screen, and you would see all of these planning task types, which are things like cube refresh, delete file from financial consolidation and close, enter form data, import data, export data. So those would all show up in Task Manager. So now the Task Manager is available as an option in planning. When you build a new planning application, life is even better. So if you are creating a new planning application during the planning application build process, down in the other details section in the lower left-hand corner, you can say, well, you know, I want to handle task flows with task lists, which is what we had available in planning at the beginning, or I now want to use Task Manager. And probably a question in your head right now may be, well, why would I use Task Manager instead of task lists? So task lists were really just that. They were just a list, like, you know, do these things in this order, but there was no audit trail. There was no way to require that someone answer a question. There was no way that someone would be required when they were performing a task to add a comment or add an attachment or add some additional piece of information that would be part of the history of the execution of that task. So that's why Task Manager is actually a big improvement on task lists. So if during the planning application build process, you enable Task Manager, that will actually install the artifacts for Task Manager. And so what will happen is in your planning build, once the install is complete, if you click on the application cluster, you'll see a new card called Task Manager. right? And if you go into the Task Manager card and you look in the Task Types vertical tab, you will see a list of all the task types that are available in planning. And there are some tasks that are similar to those that are available in FCC, such as an enter form data task. There's a run business rule task. There are tasks like import data mappings, import metadata, do application configuration, manage approvals, manage dimensions, view dashboards, view financial reports. So some of them are similar to what's available in FCC, but they're obviously looking at your planning instance rather than an FCC instance. So now the Task Manager end user interface, to be honest, my example, I'm actually using FCC tasks, but I can tell you that it's almost exactly the same. All right, so first of all, in your planning pod, there will now be a card called tasks. And in that tasks card, which will be new in your planning instance, that wasn't there before, in that task card, there is a work list vertical tab. And in that work list vertical tab, you see tasks for which you are an assignee, meaning you're the person who's supposed to perform the task, or tasks that were assigned to a team of users to which your user belongs. So if you're looking at this screen, you'll see there's a work list. I'm logged on, I believe, as the Train A user, and I am looking at a work list that contains tasks that I am supposed to perform for year 2022, period January. And there's actually two tasks in here. Like I said, they're FCC tasks, but the concept would be the same in planning. The first task is an enter form task where I need to enter exchange rates that will be used to translate balances from a subsidiary entity's currency into the currency of its parent, which is something that you would have to do for consolidation. And then the second task is a run business rule task where you would run consolidation. And notice if you look at the second column, the first task says that it's open with assignee, and the second task says that it's pending. And one of the reasons for that is in Task Manager, you can create dependencies between tasks. So in the FCC universe, and probably in the planning universe, you can say, I don't want to run this business rule consolidation. I don't want to run that until everything is in place in order to run the business rule. And one of the requirements prior to running the business rule is that you have to have exchange rates, because part of running consolidation is the translation component. And if you don't have exchange rates, then consolidation would fail. So there's no reason to have someone run the business rule unless all of the things that the business rule uses are actually in place. So that's why the first task shows as open. Until it is completed, no one would be able to perform the second task. And so that's another nice thing that you didn't have with task lists. You can create dependencies. I have to do task 1 before I do task 2, and I cannot start task 2 until task 1 has been completed, which wasn't really something that you could enforce with just task lists. Now, in addition to being able to view tasks from the work list tab in the task card of the web interface, task assignees will also receive email notifications when the status of a task on which they are the assignee, or the status of a task where the assignee is a team to which their user belongs, changes to open with prepare. So you'll see in a minute, the task definition is defined by a task administrator has a planned start time. And once that start time is passed, then the status of the task becomes open with prepare, and they will get a notification. Now, when I start mentioning the concept of getting emails, some people go, oh no, 1 million emails. But on the right-hand side of, well, first of all, on the left-hand side of the screen, you see what the email looks like. You see the properties of the task. You see some instructions on how to perform the task. And then you see a link that would let you open the task from within your email. Now, if you don't want to get, 20 emails a day, because there's actually 20 tasks you have to do in every day, in your user preferences, which is available from the tools cluster, you can specify that you really only want to get one email a day that lists all the tasks that you're supposed to do that day, right? So you don't need to get a separate email for every task. You just want to get one big email every day that says, this is what you should have been doing, right? This will also show up in the flip card on the very first page on the home page of EPM Cloud. Now, so a couple of things to be aware of. I mentioned that you can assign a task to a team, and that's really nice because what that means is if someone on the team is not available, somebody else on the team can perform the task. Now, when you assign a task to a team as the task assignee, you can create the team in such a way that you identify that one of the users is the primary user. And what that means is that when the task is generated and its status changes to open, the primary user on the team will automatically get a notification because Task Manager will auto-assign that task to the primary user on the team. If the team does not have a primary user, what will happen is the task will open up, but there will be a button that the person opening the task will have to click called claim, right? And what that does is it says, I am acting on this task, and it locks other users that are on the team to which the task was assigned from doing anything on that task. Now, if I am the primary user and the task has been automatically claimed, right, because I'm identified as the primary user on the team, but I don't want to perform the task, I can release it, which will then allow another user that's on the team to which the task was assigned to act on the task. Now, this particular task is a data form task, and you're looking at it thinking, wow, that looks just like a data form in planning, which it does for the most part. The difference is if you are using a data form from a task rather than going in from the data card, over on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a list of tabs that display information about the data form as a task within Task Manager, right? So over on the right-hand side, you see some tabs, but otherwise the data form looks pretty much like it would if you accessed it from a desktop card. So you can set the POV, you can enter data. If you're allowed to enter data, you can save data, you can change the formatting, you can do adjustments, etc. You can view reasons for read-only cells. Anything you could have done from the data form, you can do from the data form if you see it as a task. So the first tab that you would see on the right-hand side as the task assignee is a Properties tab. And the Properties tab displays the name of the task, it displays its status, it displays the period-specific schedule to which it belongs, it displays the task priority. There is information here about something called an organizational unit, which is really just like associating tasks with a particular organization that has certain holidays, so that if you don't work, for example, on July 4th, when I run the seated report that shows me whose tasks are late, you don't get, marked up for not working on a holiday. So it won't consider July 4th a day that you should have been working on the task. Also, you can see in the Properties tab, the start date and end date. That's the planned start date and planned end date as identified by the task administrator. And then at the bottom, you see the actual start date and the actual end date and the actual duration. And that information is used for one of the dashboards to help you track whether or not users are actually performing tasks on time every month. All right, so there is an instructions tab, and this is created by the task administrator. This is in addition to any instructions that are associated with the data form itself. Now, the instructions tab for a task can include attachments such as a desktop procedure. Instructions can also include information about any conditions that might prevent you as the task assignee from submitting the task and indicating that you're done. So it is possible, and I'll show you a little bit more about this in a minute, it is possible to add a requirement that the person performing the task must add comments, or they must provide specific pieces of information like where did you get the exchange rates from? They may be required to add attachments. They may be required to answer some questions. So all of that information is information that the task administrator would put in the task instructions, which again are in addition to any instructions associated with the data form. Now there is a workflow tab over on the right-hand side. The workflow tab will display the name of the task assignee, whether or not the task is assigned to an individual or assigned to a user. In this case, the task was assigned to a team, right? So it says X team train a user, which means I'm logged on as the train a user, and I've claimed the task, but the task was actually assigned to the team. So I could release the task so that anybody else on the team could act on it. Now, every task is going to have an assignee, which can be a team, and then every task may or may not have approvers. You can specify up to 10 levels of approvers. That is definitely overkill, but you may have one level of approvers. Approvers are optional. This particular task does not have an approver, and tasks will look a little bit different to an approver because they may not. You may have questions that the assignee has to answer, but the approver doesn't have to answer, or pieces of information that the assignee has to provide, but the approver doesn't have to provide. Now, every task can be associated with one or more questions defined by the task administrator, and the task administrator can require that those questions be answered before someone submits the task. And the answers to the question can be defined as a list of values, or a date, or a number, or a piece of text, or a yes/no answer, or a true/false answer, or a list answer. If you look at this question, the question is, what was the source of the exchange rates? And the answer is a list. So I either got the exchange rates from Reuters, or I got them from Bloomberg, or I got them from some other source. And you can tell that this question is required because there's a little gold star. So what would happen is if you were logged on as the assignee and you click the submit task button without answering the question, you would get a little error message that says you can't submit the task without answering the question. So one of the things that you can think about Task Manager from the audit trail perspective is it is a repository of information about everything associated with the performance of that task. Now, there's also a comments tab. The comments tab will allow assignees or approvers to enter comments. It will also allow assignees or approvers to upload attachments. You can limit the size of attachments. That's a system setting. And task administrators can create rules that require that the person performing the task enter comments or add at least one attachment. And the rules can be set up based on certain conditions. So you could say if the task was assigned to team A, then we have to enter an attachment. If the task was assigned to team B, we don't have to enter, or we don't have to answer a question, for example. So there is also another role for Task Manager called a viewer. And a viewer is not someone who's actually performing the task or approving the task. All they are doing is they're able to look at the task and they're able to view the comments. They're able to view the task history. They're able to view the attachments, but they cannot do anything to indicate that the task is complete. And they can't do anything to indicate that the task has been approved. Now, the related tab, and again, we're looking at tasks as someone who's performing the task. The related tab displays related tasks which may require completion depending upon how they were defined. So notice what we're actually looking at here in the upper left-hand corner. We're looking at the second task that was assigned to me. This is the run consolidation task. And over on the right-hand side, it shows that this task has a predecessor of the enter exchange rates task. And what that means is, even though I am the assignee on the run consolidation task, If the person to whom the enter exchange rates task has not submitted the task and it has not yet been marked as complete, even though the start date and time of the run consolidation task has passed, because it is dependent upon completion of its predecessor, it cannot be executed until the predecessor task has been completed. Now, the history tab is the best thing about Task Manager. That's the bottom icon over on the right-hand side of the bottom tab. And you read history from the bottom up. So the history shows you that the administrator basically generated a schedule for a specific financial close period. They changed the status of the task to open by basically opening the schedule, and then the start date of the task passed. And so the schedule or the task status changed to open with assignee. And then reading the next entry up from that, the person who claimed the task, the train A user, they answered question 1. They added a comment. They clicked the submit button. And because this task had no approvers, by clicking the submit button, the train A user effectively changed the status of the task to closed. And there are some dashboards where you would be able to see for a given task schedule for a given period or a given business process and planning, what percentage of tasks are still open and what percentage of tasks are completed. And it is also possible to reopen a task. That's a system setting, but it is possible to reopen a closed task if something else needs to be added. But that's an option that you can set up under system options. So there are numerous reports that are available for documentation of the audit trail of task performance. The one on the left side of the screen is a report called the Task Audit Trail that shows exactly the same information that you would see in the History tab in the web interface. Again, reading from the bottom up, you can see that the task was open. The train A user answered a question. The train A user added a comment. The train A user may have added an attachment, and then the train A user, who is the person who claimed the task, they clicked the submit button. The task had no approvers, so its status changed to closed. There are also some seeded reports, like the one that you see on the right-hand side, which basically shows how did you do? Are there people that always do their tasks late? Every month, do you always end up with 90% of your tasks are completed on time, but the other 10% are not? All right, so you do have some performance analysis reports. There's also a dashboard for that. Now, one of the coolest things about Task Manager is that it is a centralized repository of not only the history of everything that was done by the person performing the task, but it's also a repository of any associated information. So if in order to perform a task, you needed to go to Bloomberg's website, you can add that as a link in a comment. If you downloaded something from Bloomberg's website, you can add that as attachment. And that becomes part of the task history in the centralized Task Manager repository. And you can run something called a report binder for a given task or for all tasks within a given monthly schedule. And the report binder on the left-hand side, it shows you the properties of the task. And then in the top on the right-hand side, it shows you the task history, read from the bottom to the top, just like you would see if you were in the history tab of the task itself. But the report binder is also a zip file. And when you open the zip file, there will be a directory structure inside. And inside that directory structure, there will be a folder that contains all of the attachments that someone uploaded to that task. So you don't have to worry about having related Excel documents stored in some subdirectory on somebody's PC or in SharePoint or whatever. It's all part of the report binder for that task. And just to comment, if you have clients that are using Account Reconciliation Cloud, it looks very similar. It also provides a centralized repository for everything having to do with reconciliation tasks as well. Right, now, I mentioned that there are dashboards. There's two dashboards. The first dashboard is the task overview, and that shows you for a given period or for a given business process, how many of the tasks are complete and how many are still open. So we are looking at a task overview for a particular task schedule for January of 2022. There's a bar chart that shows that 2 of our tasks are complete and 0 are incomplete. If you were to double click on the bar or the complete bar, which shows in green, it would actually show you a list of the tasks that were complete, and then you could click on any task and it would take you into the task screen. So you could view the task history. The compliance overview dashboard is a little bit more of a measure of how are we doing every month. So again, this is a compliance dashboard for the January 2022 business process or the January 2022 fiscal period. It shows we had 2 completed tasks. 100% of them were prepared on time or prepared before the suggested end date entered by the task administrator, and there were no rejected tasks. So again, that's kind of a how are we doing dashboard. So I'm briefly going to go through how do you build that template and how do you build the tasks in that template, and then how do you generate a schedule so that end users can actually perform the tasks. So first thing that you do is if you think that you're going to assign tasks to teams, you define those teams in Task Manager. Now, this is not like a security feature like you would do in planning. It is specific to Task Manager to allow you to assign tasks to a team of users so that anyone on the team can act on that task as long as they claim the task. So in the screen, I have a team called X team. It has 2 users, train A user and train K user. And notice that I've checked the checkbox for the train A user to indicate that they are the primary user. So when a task is assigned to the X team, and then the task status becomes open, the train A user will get the email. When they click on the link in the email, it will open the task and it will show that they've automatically claimed the task, but they would be able to release it if they wanted someone else to take action on the task instead of them. Now, organizational units are defined in Task Manager. They can be associated with tasks. Organizational units primarily have to do with what are the days that you work. So you notice we have an organizational unit called X01 organization. And at the bottom, the work days that are identified that people in this organizational unit work Monday through Friday. So if you were to look at the dashboard and it showed tasks as being late, it would not assume that people worked on Saturdays and Sundays. Also, the organizational unit is associated with something called a holiday rule. So let me show you the holiday rule. So this is a holiday rule defined for the United States that says in the US, we take New Year's Day as a holiday and we take Independence Day on July 4th. Now, I think Canada actually has an Independence Day, but it's a different day. So the holiday rule is associated with an organizational unit, again, to identify days that will basically be ignored when you run a report that shows you whether or not tasks are late or not. So it doesn't penalize people for not working on days that are holidays or not working on days that are identified as regular work days. Now, the assumption with Task Manager is somewhat that the lists of tasks for a period close or for a specific fiscal period in FCC or for a specific business process in planning, that the tasks are somewhat the same every time you run through the list. So the first thing that you do is you create something called a template, right? And the template can be associated with an organizational unit in order to have that association with holiday rules. Now, when you create a task within the template, you give the task a name You give it an ID, you give it a description, you can associate an organizational unit, which will basically associate a holiday rule. And then you can specify what is the type of task. So is it a data form task? Is it a run business rule task? Is it an import data task, right? And that determines what parameters you're asked for in the parameters tab. So this particular task that I'm defining is an enter form data task. And this happens to be an FCC enter form data task, but it could be a planning form data task. Task types available in Task Manager include FCC specific task types, if you've installed Task Manager in FCC, or planning task types if you're in a planning application. You also have ARC task types. Now, there are two task types that you would have regardless of whether or not it was FCC or planning. One of them is called a basic task, and a basic task is just a task where you answer questions and you add comments and maybe you add attachments, but it doesn't necessarily open a data form and it doesn't necessarily run a business rule. It doesn't necessarily run a data load rule. It's truly just a basic task. So answer these questions, enter some comments, submit the task to acknowledge that you've done it. There is also something called a parent task. And a parent task is really just a group of basic tasks, but its status changes when all of its children are complete. So it's kind of like a way of seeing things at a summary level. Now, task parameters vary by task type. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the parameters for a task type of enter data form. So the parameters for an enter data form task are what's the name of the data form. On the right-hand side, the parameters for a run business rule task are whatever parameters you would normally pass to that business rule. So in FCC, if we were running a business rule like consolidation, the parameters that we pass to the business rule are we are running consolidation for a specific scenario, a specific year, a specific period, and a specific entity. And it is very easy to say every time I generate a new schedule from this template, the parameters are going to be different because if this is a schedule or a business process for March, then the period will be March. When I do it for April, the period will be April, and that's not that difficult to do. Task instructions, again, will appear to the end user, the assignee, in the instructions tab. And task instructions will normally be defined to tell the person performing the task if there are any required questions that they have to answer, if they have to enter comments, if they have to add attachments, if there are any specific pieces of information that they might need to provide, which we call custom attributes. Right, so if I need to solicit a specific piece of information from you, I can also create a rule, right? But you would put that in the instructions so that if someone got a little pop-up window that said, you can't submit the task because you forgot to answer this question or something, they can go back and look at the instructions and go, oh, I had to answer a question. Right. So every task can be assigned either to a team or an individual user. If the task is assigned to a team, the task administrator can specify that the task requires action from any assignee or all assignees. And actually, I miswrote that sentence because normally the task administrator would specify that any member of the team can act on the task and act on behalf of all assignees. So you don't need to have 5 different people open the same data form and go, yeah, the numbers are right. All right, now the task workflow is dependent upon the task type. So on the left-hand side, you see what the workflow tab in the task definition looks like for an enter data form task. And so the assignee is a person, and they're going to see the task in their work list, and they're going to open the task, answer the questions. If the task is an automated task, like running a data load rule or running a business rule, instead of having a task assignee, you have what's called a run as user, right? Because basically they're going to get an email, they're going to acknowledge the email, and then the task will just run, but they will never need to go into the rules screen, but the rule will run under that person's name as the run as user, but they will never actually need to go to the rule screen. They will never need to go to a form and pick running the rule from the form. They're literally kicking off the rule by authorizing the task from the task interface. Now, every task can have one or more questions to be answered by the task assignee. The answer types can be, you have to enter a date, you have to enter a number, you have to enter 3 lines of text, you have to pick a value from a list of values, which is what this question is. You have to answer yes or no. So if you look at this particular question, the question is, what is the source of the exchange rates? The type of answer is a list. The task is associated with the assignee. So the assignee has to answer the question, but the approver probably doesn't. The approver will be able to see the answer that the assignee provided, but they won't be able to change that answer. The task administrator can check the checkbox that says that you have to answer the question as the task assignee. And because the type of question answer is a list, then the task administrator can create that list of values so that the answer to the question is consistent. Right, so you're not going to have one person type rooters, ROOTERS, and another person type rooters, REUTERS. Individual tasks can be assigned a task predecessor, which is a task which must be completed before the current task can be executed. So what we're looking at here is we are looking at the run business rule or run consolidation task, and we can see that it has a predecessor of the enter exchange rates data form task. And the condition says the enter exchange rate task must be finished before the run consolidation task can be started. Right. So the email that gets sent by the run consolidation task, that email won't even be sent until the enter exchange rates task is complete by virtue of the assignee of the enter exchange rates task having clicked on the submit task button and closed the task. Now, there's a couple things that are just magnificent in Task Manager. Well, a couple of things, but they're all sort of fall under the same heading. So one of them is something called task rules. So task rules can be utilized to determine how the task can be processed. Now, ideally, you can make it so the tasks get processed automatically under certain conditions, and they just get marked as complete without anybody ever having to go in and do anything. But if there are things that you need to require that someone does on a task, you can create rules, and the rule types that you can create are auto submit task, which means basically the task submits itself, or you can create a rule that prevents submission of the task under certain conditions. So if you look at the screenshots, this rule prevents submission of the task, and that's on the left-hand side. So that's the rule type is prevent task submission. On the right-hand side, the condition is if you didn't enter a comment. So what would happen is if you're the task assignee and there's a required question or there's a required comment and you don't enter comments and it sees the number of comments is 0, you're going to get a little pop-up message that says you must enter a comment. Now, the other types of rules are auto-approve task or prevent task approval or prevent task rejection. Those are only relevant if the task has an approver. You can specify conditions where the task automatically gets approved. You can have conditions where you would prevent rejection of a task unless the rejector provides a reason why they are rejecting the task. And you can also have an email be sent automatically if the status of the task is updated to rejected or the status of the task is updated to complete. You can send an email to a specific person with content information from the task history. Now, the task definition history has its own audit trail. So if you want to go back and see, oh, the task administrator added a question to this task, or the task administrator added a rule that would require that someone enter comments. Well, there's an audit trail associated with the definition of the task itself. And you see that on the left-hand side, that's the history tab in the task definition. But on the right-hand side, there's also an audit report where you can see an audit trail of any change that was made by the task administrator to the definition of the task itself. So if they changed the instructions, if they added a question, if they added a rule, if they added a custom attribute, you have an audit trail of all of that information. Now, another thing, usually at this point in the one-day hands-on workshop class, which we teach pretty regularly, usually when people have gone through creating things manually through the web interface, they're like, can I do this in Excel? And the answer is, of course you can. So task information can be exported to Excel, managed in Excel, and this would allow you to do things like do a mass update. So the assignee on 10 of the tasks in your business process used to be Dave. Dave got promoted, so now he's not going to be the person anymore. So now we're going to go into Excel and we're going to change the assignee on all those 10 tasks from Dave to Justin, right? And one of the nice things is you can do the updates in Excel, but then if you re-import the task definition from your Excel worksheet, the history is still going to be preserved regardless of whether or not the changes were made in the web interface or the changes were made via Excel by exporting the task to Excel, doing the update in Excel, and then re-importing. There also is mask update functionality through the web interface as well. If you wanted to update the task assignee on multiple tasks at once, you don't actually have to export stuff to Excel. That's just what a lot of companies want to do. Now, I do see there's one question. I will try and get to that when I'm done going through the slides. The audit card in the tools cluster displays an audit of all changes made to the definition of the task. Whether or not you added a question, whether or not you added a rule that required comments, etc. And then once you have the template, right, which contains the list of tasks and the properties of those tasks that you perform every time you execute this business process, then you can generate something called a task schedule. Right, so the task schedule will basically generate a list of tasks for a given period with the appropriate actual calendar dates for that period. So you generate a schedule from the template, you specify what is day 0 for this specific schedule. And so if the start date of the task is day 0 plus 2 days, and day 0 is July 1st, that task will become open on July 3rd, right? Because its start date is day 0 plus 2 days. The task administrator will set the status of the period specific schedule to open. And as soon as that happens, the status of any task whose start date and time is already in the past will automatically change to open with the assignee, and the assignee will get an email with a link to perform the task. There is a tab in the task card that is for the administrator where they can look at the task schedule to see whether or not tasks have been performed or not. They can't act on the task unless they are the task assignee. They can just see whether or not tasks have been acted upon by the task assignee. So in this screen, we see the 2 tasks in my January 2022 schedule. The first task is open with assignee, but because it is not complete, the second task is pending because the first task is its predecessor. Open tasks again will appear in the assignee's work list in the web interface, and the assignee will receive an email notification to perform the task but they'll get those email notifications based on their notification preferences. The assignee will process the task from the task screen. They can answer the questions. They can enter whatever data they need to enter in the associated data form. If it's a data form task, they would answer any required questions. They would enter comments if those are required by a rule. They could enter custom attributes if those are required by a rule. And if they violate any of the rules associated with the task, they get an error message. So the error message on the left-hand side is an error message that the assignee would see if they didn't answer all the required questions. The error message that they see on the lower right-hand side would be if they violated one of the conditions of the rule. And my rules said that you have to enter a comment. Right? And again, you would put that information in the instructions as well, but you make the error message meaningful so that they understand what they did wrong. So the error message in the lower right says you must enter a comment. Now, the audit card in the tools cluster allows you to review actions taken in the performance of a task, as well as the audit trail of any changes that were made to the definition of a task. But again, you can see this information from the history tab of the individual task itself. And for automated tasks where you are running a business rule or you're running a data load rule from data management, you can act on the task from the work list, but more likely what would happen is once the task becomes available for you to act upon it, you will get an email. And in the email, it will ask you, do you authorize the execution of this task? And if you say, yes, I authorize the execution of the task, it will kick off the task as though you had actually gone into the rules screen, selected the rule to run, entered the parameters, and clicked the run rule button. Because the parameters are embedded in the automated task definition. So all you really need to do is just say, yeah, I want you to run the data load rule, or I want you to run the business rule. And what that does is it kicks off the rule, or it basically kicks off the application job automatically without you ever having had to go into the screen where you would normally kick off the job. You're just kicking it off from an email. Now, automated tasks such as running a business rule or running a data load rule, they're still going to run a job. So you're still going to have the same audit trail that you would have had you run the business rule or run the job from like a standard card in planning. Notice in this case, we see the consolidate job ran just like it would have run had I run it from the rules screen. But the really spiffy thing is that once the job runs, it updates the task. So if you go back and you look at the automated task screen and you look at the properties, you see there's a message on the lower left-hand side that shows you that the job ran and it completed successfully, and it shows you the log messages. And then on the right-hand side, you can see in the parameters tab, those were the parameters that were passed to the job. But with all of this, you never actually need to go look at the job. You never actually need to run the rule or go into data exchange. You're doing all this from Task Manager. Now, something to keep in mind, just as a side comment, some companies will be running business rules and running data load rules from EPM Automate. And that's still certainly an option. Task Manager has a much better audit trail than EPM Automate, but part of it is dependent upon whether or not you want that audit trail or not. So the audit report for an automated task will show status changes by virtue of the job having run in the associated application. So notice you see the top two tasks. You see the field message change from processing to complete. And that is a result of the job talking back to Task Manager and saying, hey, I'm done. And then the history of the automated task will display task completion when the associated job completed successfully. So questions. What was meant by embedded task?
Yes.
So the way that Task Manager works is, let's say that you actually have 3 templates, right? You have a template that you use for tasks that are performed monthly. You have another template that you use for tasks that are performed quarterly, right? So you can have a template that has other templates embedded in it. And so if you generate a task schedule for the quarterly template, it's going to generate a schedule that includes tasks from the quarterly template and the monthly template. So you're generating a schedule from the quarterly template within which is embedded the monthly template, right? So it's just a way of kind of putting a bunch of templates together so that you don't have to generate a schedule for each template individually. You generate a schedule off the container template, and then it generates schedules from every task within the templates that are embedded in the bigger template. Hopefully I explained that. Okay. So we don't actually cover embedded templates in the one-day hands-on course, but if you attend, I could show you how to do that. And just one other little comment, we have a one-day hands-on workshop for Task Manager. It's pretty generic. So we teach the course for both FCC users and for planning users. And at the very end of the course examples are building a template and then building tasks within the template. It's the exact example that I did in the slides. So we build a template with 2 tasks. One is an enter form task, one is an automated task. And then we actually generate a schedule from the template, and then we go execute the task within the template or within the schedule as an end user to make certain that everything that you created works. And then at the very end of the one-day hands-on workshop, I have a couple of bonus labs that we do to show you how to run a data management rule from Task Manager. And I also have a bonus workshop showing you how to run a profitability and cost management allocation rule from Task Manager, since those 2 things still require that you set up a connection. So if you're interested in the one-day hands-on workshop where you can break things and fix them, just let us know. We'd be delighted to sign you up for a course. And I think if nobody has any other questions, then we should be good.
Thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to join us next Wednesday for the Cloud EPM Planning Drill Through Best Practices webcast. I just dropped that link in the chat box for you all. And again, thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.